Okay.
All right, so this is Phone and Skype Constellations video training class number 2, 2016. Welcome, everybody. Any questions on the suggested activity or studies questions? And I think I saw a hand from Patrick.
Yes, Michael. So I watched the 15-minute video on the, what do you call it again? The coaching platform. Yeah. Now, that was a kind of a reenactment of an actual constellation you performed with representatives, correct?
It's actually an amalgam of 2 constellations to protect the people that were involved. It's the constellation that I anatomized in Chapter 2 of Health, Happiness, and Family Constellations.
Okay.
So this was not actually done with a client. This was prepared for coaching spaces as a tool, and I've used it to present at meetings, and it's really probably the shortest reasonably full look at a constellation around, I think.
Well, it was a fascinating constellation. Is it reasonable that issue would be addressed in coaching spaces in that way and very effectively?
Yeah, I mean,
okay.
An actual constellation. Yes, I mean, we'll be back in coaching spaces, either class 4 or class 4 or class 5, and I'll be, it'll be a much more organized demonstration than when I did something in the trial video, when I just was sort of showing you stuff.
Yeah. Okay. Well, that's what I was curious about. Thank you.
Coaching Spaces is a great tool if you can, understand the interface and you got clients with a certain level of technical comfort and technical tools, namely the right browsers and things like this. You're going to see that I emphasize more and more keeping this grounded to the, keeping the client as involved as possible and as comfortable as possible. Okay. Any other questions at this point? Go ahead.
Yes. About the practice partner, I put out a request. I don't know if that person, but I didn't hear anything back. I'm just wondering if anybody else is wanting to do a practice partner or how that's going for everybody else, because I'd like to have a practice partner. Okay, Patrick? Okay. And so is Patrick's email on the group email, Sandy, or how do we get in touch?
Yep. All the emails are visible.
Okay. All right. Patrick will shoot emails back and forth.
Great. That'd be great.
Great. Okay. Go ahead, Marie.
Yeah, I haven't got a practice partner either.
Anybody else want to opt in here while we're doing this? All right, I'm not hearing anything from the voice-only people. You can just get a friend or a relative too. It doesn't have to.
I'm okay to be a partner.
Andres, is that you?
Yeah, sorry. Yes, absolutely.
So Maria L. Andres says he might want to do this. You guys would need to partner up via Skype or Zoom or something like that because you're on the opposite sides of the world. And you'll have a little bit of, you're going to have to work out your time zones.
Right, yeah.
But I have conversations with people. When do I have them? I think late afternoon, early evening for me is early morning in Australia, and that's kind of the best time. So now you got another 6 hours to deal with. So I'm not sure, you guys will have to see whether your time zones work.
Yeah, that's fine. I do stuff for the US all the time.
All right. Okay. All right. So Marie L. asked this wonderful question, or brought up this wonderful point, which I want to speak to for a couple of minutes. She said she had heard that you can't constellate someone who's bipolar, or else that you can't constellate somebody who's bipolar unless you're very good, quote unquote. I think statements like this are just too vague to be helpful. The questions are, well, what is meant here by bipolar, and who are you, and what does constellate mean? All these are so loose. Is this somebody who's got a clinical DSM 5 or 4, symptoms of bipolar stuff. Well, okay, that's a supposedly fairly severe case. Is this person on meds or not? Is this person coming off of meds after dealing with the mainstream, medical approach and wants to do something? Do you understand me? Or is this just a person who feels like they have mood swings? These are all really different. What does constellate mean in this sense? Does it mean heal the bipolar stuff somehow, or have some impact on the bipolar stuff? Does it mean do a structural constellation around somebody wants a job, and the fact that this person is somehow bipolar? It isn't, we're not working on that directly. Do you understand what I'm saying here? I hear statements like this a lot, and I generally, I don't like them. They're a form of sort of hearsay stuff that floats around. And there's so many different kinds of constellations. There's so many different, desired positive changes that people could be working for. There's so many shades of meaning in a term like bipolar. If someone's clinically schizophrenic, well, are they capable of even talking to you? I really don't know. But the point is, I don't think statements like that are very helpful. They're just too vague. Also, the first question was, well, what is this condition? That's very vague. The second is, who is this person? What, how bipolar what? And the third one is what does constellate mean? But then there's also, who are you? And that was sort of covered in the way that Marie L. asked the question. So I'm going to say some general remarks here very quickly about what keeps you safe in constellation work. This stuff is covered in my the Knowing Field article, January 2011, called Emotional and Psychic Hygiene in Family Constellations. It'll be in PDF form on your homework page if you want to look at it. Okay? You don't have to, it'll be available. And let me just add that I've said before, I give a lot of stuff out here. You don't feel overwhelmed, and don't feel like you have to somehow run and do it all. That's not the point. The point is to present a very rich picture from which people can take what they need and what works for them. I talked there about 3 things that I thought were very important. I think that everybody has a natural kind of immune system, a psychic immune system, as well as a physical immune system. There's just a natural protection that people have. That's, I'm going to say be careful around trauma, and I am. And I'm going to explain that in a whole bunch of graphic detail here in a second. But also, don't get scared to work with people. Do you understand me? I mean, you have a natural psychic immune system, and so do the people that you're working with, though theirs might be in slightly less good shape than yours. Next thing is, we're trained mostly in non-judgment. In constellation work, we're trained to stay in a space of compassion and non-judgment for all kinds of things. That is a tremendous and powerful form of safety. Even if you're confronted by somehow actively hostile energy in a constellation or something like this, the state of compassionate non-judgment is really your best protection, quite honestly. And finally, that, if you're working in integrity and a certain kind of humility, and if you're feeling into the field and doing that with integrity and humility, I think that, in your work in general doing that, I think that the field will guide the right people to you. And typically you're not very often going to get people that are like too overwhelming for you to work with. Or if you bump up against such people, you'll get a sense of that fairly quickly and have the humility to say, this is a little beyond me. Also on the subject of like, who are you? You know, how much of your own stuff have you healed? And how deep was that stuff? You can work with people unless they scare you, or they trigger you, or you don't have the tools. I mean, those three are somewhat separate from one another, but they're all important. If you're really scared by what you come up against, you're not going to be able to work with it very well, and you shouldn't be trying. If you are triggered by it, that means that, you know, this is getting involved with your own stuff, right? And being scared by it and triggered by it might coincide or not. Both those things are you see, what I'm trying to do is give you a more general answer about what you can and cannot constellate or work with. It's, you know, as opposed to these statements like, don't do this particular thing. Hang on a second. I've also come up against people, not against, I've come up and felt in cases that I just didn't have the tools to deal with something. It didn't scare me, it didn't trigger me, but, you know, I felt at times like, no, this person should go see a homeopath, or there's not that much ancestral involvement here, or if there is, it's not going to move right now. There are things like that. I'm also very careful around situations where somebody comes to work for someone else. So the classic case of this is a mom who comes and wants to work for one of her children or something like this. So son is a drug addict of some sort, and mom wants to help. I do not turn such things down immediately, though I've heard that, you know, you're supposed to turn them down immediately. I do this is, again, we go back to why there's a separate intake. I do the intake. I'm very careful to get a sense of, well, what's the mom's purpose here? Is she, in some sense, involved with her son, or ego-driven? Is she trying to fix this person? Or is she really, in some sense, trying to help her son and her whole family, and is in a kind of state of compassion herself? I hope you understand the difference. You know, what's her purpose here? Hang on a second again. I also will encourage her, you know, I will be querying and encouraging to, like, well, what's your need here, and should we be working on you? Do you understand me? When someone comes to get help for somebody else, it's always a question of, well, is this a projection of something that, you know, is really kind of your issue, and maybe we should be dealing with that. Then the other thing is, if we're going to get into a constellation, then I very carefully query the other people in the field and simply ask them, how willing are you for us to do this work? Do you understand me? How willing are you to accept help in this way? And I've had absolute total no's at times, and I've had yeses. And if it's a no, it's a no. In one case, I was working with a man who had a wife who he felt was a borderline personality, and from the description, she probably was. And she was working with another therapist, and you know, we did a constellation. I had to put his wife in it because she was a major issue in his life, but I found that she didn't want to move at all in the constellation. She stayed absolutely put. And when I sort of queried about, you know, would you, this was a constellation on the floor done remotely. So I had object persons on the floor. And when I sort of felt into her and I said, well, could we maybe offer you just a little support from your own ancestral family or something like that? And I had a piece of rose quartz I was going to put behind her. The reaction then was a complete psychic kick. The rose quartz bumped something, and as I was setting it down, and her piece moved, and his phone rang that instant with her calling him. And it was very clear that she did not want us at all. And so all I could really do in that constellation was try to help the man reorganize a bit of his own family situation around what his goal was. Does that make sense? So I don't say no to people who, sometimes you have to kind of work with, a family where there's other people who may not want to be there. You feel into the field and behave carefully around that. Okay. All right, I'll stop for a second here. You got any questions about this stuff? This is a general attempt to tell you how I think about these things that's different from going around saying you can never constellate a bipolar person, you can never constellate someone who, is working on the other side of their family system or their in-laws or working. Do you understand me? Those kind of statements, I just don't think they're helpful. Comments, questions? Talk. Okay.
Yeah, me. It's Marie. Sorry. Do you mean you actually ask various family members in person whether or not they mind? No.
No, I mean, I set them up tentatively and query them in either the constellation or a little constellation beforehand to kind of see if we really have their I don't know if permission is the right word, but if they're interested in receiving help in this manner.
Right.
Okay.
Yes.
I'm not going to intrude. I'm not going to intrude. I do in most cases very powerful constellations, but I nudge, I don't fudge. That's one of my things. Nudge, don't fudge. And fudging means pushing, assuming, and all this is in chapters 2 and chapters 4 of Health, Happiness, and Family Constellations again. Anybody else? All right. Oh, yeah, go ahead. Becca, you first, and then Patrick.
Yeah, you had mentioned the psychic immune system that we all naturally have. Could you talk a little bit more if you are aware of any practices to help strengthen that?
Yeah, I am. I don't want to spend too much time on that, but
okay.
The sort of classic first steps are putting the white light around yourself occasionally, doing that kind of stuff. The book that taught me the most about this is Dion Fortune's Psychic Self-Defense. Okay. It's rather old, but I think she really covers the ground. I'll put that on the book list.
Okay, perfect.
Page.
Thank you.
Patrick?
Yeah, Michael, I think you make a great deal of sense here. And just to comment, I've learned some of this through error, by trying to do a constellation. I remember one time a mother had a problem with her son, and I tried to do the constellation for the boy, and I realized after the fact I should have done it for her, in that regard. And one time a woman going through a divorce absolutely refused to see her husband as the father of her children. And that simply stopped the process, but I tried to, go forward in that sense. And then also in my coaching early on in training, Peter used to say to me, you got to walk the edge. You got to be right on the edge. And it is a state of fear in some sense. It's kind of I shouldn't say fear. It's an unknown. And so with these kinds of things, it seems to me that there's this unknown that the edge that we push against. And so I appreciate what you said, and it makes a great deal of sense. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Thank all of you. I'm going to move on, and there'll be more question times in a minute. We're going to go to the screen share here. Now, I may not, No, there are no questions right now, so this is good. All right, so wait a minute. So I got to share this, and then I've got to find the thing, and I can't find it. I love this. So this should go away, and where is, no, I'm sorry, this should not go away. Wait a minute. Here it is. Okay. This is just like flying a big airplane, I tell you. Okay, so now I have to take this to full screen. All right, so now you should see, and the Zoom stuff is covering something that I need. That's no fun. All right, so anyway, this is the, you all see the orange background and the bunch of stuff, right? All right, so let's just see if we can, all right, so, yeah, there's what you're supposed to see in the beginning. All right, so this is some stuff on trauma. It comes out of Dan Siegel's book, Mindsight. You're looking here at an idealized and simplified version of the two halves of the brain, the right brain and the left brain. There's two kinds of memory involved here. Implicit memory is like procedural memory. It's like you ride a bicycle, but you could not possibly explain it. Do you understand me? It's memory that is very, very detailed, and it typically hasn't been passed via this hippocampus here. I hope you can see my cursor moving. This part of the brain passes these implicit memories to the other side of the brain. The left brain does all the math on these. It makes the stories, it does the generalizations, it does the numbers. And this stuff over here is the stuff that's your narrative of your life. This stuff is there in great detail, but it's not like stuff you can necessarily remember. All right. And it might or might not have been ever brought across to this side. So let me pop down here. When your fight, flight, or freeze system activates, all the higher functions are unnecessary and not quick enough. Right? So these older limbic and reptilian parts of the brain take over. And what happens is the hippocampus takes a hike. It stops or shuts down partially. When that happens, you're still recording, your right brain is still full of these implicit memories of what really happened, okay? But you're in a state whereby they're not coming over here and getting fully processed and becoming part of the things that it's easy for you to remember, that are part of the story of your life, that you understand, that you maybe have some acceptance of, and so on, that you can generalize about. Does that make sense to people? Give me a wave or a nod. Good, okay. So, all right, so what happens after this state is over is that, the hippocampus goes back to work, but see these little dark guys here, they represent implicit memories that never made it across. So these, in some kind of catastrophic incident-based trauma, you may not remember what happened after the car hit you and things like that. In pattern-based trauma, I have very few poor memories of my dad's constant abuse of me. It was emotional abuse, not physical, but it was pretty much constant as he became more and more of an alcoholic. I know that stuff in his head, but I can't remember it too well. So the dark squiggles here are like those unprocessed raw memories. And the thing about them is if they ever come across here, this side of the brain thinks they're present tense. It does not know. It literally, oh, sorry. I didn't mean for that to happen. Go back. Okay. It does not know that these are in the past. That is the neurological truth as far as people understand it right now. And because of that, your brain tries to figure out how they could possibly be true in the present. Does that make sense? They come across as raw, fresh data because they've never been there before. Again, there'll be time for questions. I see a puzzled look, which is great. Your experience of these events is incomplete in some very important way. Why is it incomplete? Because this is how survival built us. And it's good that this happens because there are times when these lower parts of the brain, they just have to do their job. And they can't be waiting around for the left brain, which is slower and all this kind of stuff, to analyze it. Really, our left hemisphere is supposed to be a kind of troubleshooter. In our culture, it's really taken over in a sense that probably is not that healthy. All right, the worst case here is flashbacks, otherwise known as flooding. So here's a case where latent raw memories of overwhelm, which they're trying to get across here because your organism has a desire for wholeness. And this is a state of disconnection and incoherence here. All right, because literally one side of the brain does not know what's over here. So if something big happens, the combat vet hears a car backfire, drops the grocery bag, and jumps under a van. All right, that's a flashback. What happened? The sound, right? There are all these memories of gunshots and explosions sitting over here that happened while that vet was in a state of fight, flight, freeze, whatever. You understand me? Was in survival mode, and so the car backfires, and this stuff floods across here. And the thing is, it's perceived as present. Even though you can say that in some sense, yes, the vet ought to know that it's the veteran ought to know that it's not a gun, but that part is overwhelmed because these are perceived as present tense, and so the left brain tries to hang them on the present somehow. Making sense, I hope. This is very simple. It's oversimplified in a way, but it's beautiful stuff, I think. What happens to us much more often are what I call blurbacks in the book. We don't have a word for this, and I think we need one. Blurbacks are smaller things where, the hippocampus isn't shut down completely and it's not huge, but we have an overlay of old stuff that's attaching its stuff to the present. And the classic example that I use here is all of my time in graduate school when every male dissertation advisor was my father. And I was, too easily triggered or even hostile at times. I experienced them in some cases as way more problematic and hostile than they were because I was having blurbacks. Do you see what I mean? These old embedded memories here, these implicit memories, these procedural memories, were popping across with the present tense stuff that's being recorded here all the time. And I'm seeing those guys through a colored lens of greater hostility towards me than at least two of them had. I'm not sure about one. This is very important. Everybody there's what's called big T and small t trauma. Everybody has a bunch of small t trauma. Okay, they aren't catastrophic events. They're much more often they're pattern-based things, and a lot of them come out of childhood or schools or various things like this, where it's not that there was one big event, but the same pattern happened. The same teacher treated you the same bad way, for a whole year or something, and that puts you into this kind of maybe frozen state since you can't fight or flee. Right? You start to freeze a bit, and then you're not processing these things. So they're sitting there. It is of great value in your life to have a sense of when you are involved in a blurback yourself, or when other people are having blurbacks, especially, you're triggering them, so to speak. I mean, at my age, looking like me, I trigger a lot of people around fathers. And I just have to kind of be aware of that sometimes, right? If somebody had big problems with dad and they're interacting with me, that might happen. And if I kind of know it's happening, I don't have to react the same way. I can make allowances and understand that it's not personal, et cetera, and so on. What we do in trauma healing, and I'm using energy psychology as an example here, but there's all these other tools, you know, somatic experiencing, sensory motor stuff, Bertoni's exercises, there's a bunch of, and our work is that we somehow call up these latent memories in a safe, controlled, and resource-supported situation while we're doing something to help the patient, the client, the person calmly process this. We're keeping their hippocampus online, so to speak, so that instead of, you know, freak out and worry and fear, what we have is emotional release and cognitive shifts and witnessing and an increase in wholeness. So the cognitive shift with my dad, even though my father damaged me in certain ways, you know, I know it was very good for me. I accept that this happened and that it launched me on my current life paths and so on and so forth. All right, I'm going to go on just a minute here with some other stuff because I just want you to see it. But that is a very simple, widely applicable understanding of what's going on in trauma. I was just overjoyed. This is in Dan Siegel's book, Mindsight. That one is already on your homework page. That's an awesome book. Awesome book. That guy's done a ton of interdisciplinary work on attachment theory and all kinds of things and come up with some amazingly useful general stuff based on neurology and even complexity theory. Okay, now I want to show you these pictures because they're good pictures. We are a social species, sort of a classic social species, African termites, right? So they build these incredible, you see a picture, they build these incredible cities that have ventilation and drainage and farms and exits and they fight wars. They move their whole colony when foraging. You know, I mean, this is an intelligent entity. And I ask you, where is the brain? It's not the queen. Every single little termite is like a neuron in the brain. Same with bees, right? So this is what is called a distributed collective intelligence. And it's what I'm going to say, you know, the family system is, apart from its psychic aspects, the family system is one of these. I think what we don't realize and what our humanness has a lot of trouble with is if you just go up the hierarchy here of intelligence, insects, herd animals, pack hunters, primates, and humans, the individuality of every single being goes up. You know, we all know that the wolves have a lot more individuality and a much more complex dance in organizing a pack than a herd does. Though the herd has some individuality too. But in each case, there's still this distributed collective social intelligence. How do I know that? How do I know that's there in humans? Because we survived when we didn't have language and thought. What the hell kept us going when there was no language and no thought? We had this same sort of, you know, underlying subconscious collective social intelligence. Second reason I know that is that social neurobiology has basically figured out that the human brain is hardwired. It has a social empathy system that it's amazing. All right. We are designed to respond to one another. We know or intuit what others are feeling and thinking by, I don't want to go into too much detail, but I mean, there's literally neurons if I say to you, John was chopping wood and he slipped the axe, and it slammed right into his ankle. Okay, now I saw Patrick grimace. When I say that the axe slammed into his ankle, I can feel that in my ankle. Do you understand me? I mean, I got a twinge there. If you and the way that, the whole way that empathy works is that we use our own bodies to create an image of what's going on in the other person. And this is true whether you're reading a book or watching television or in real life with people. And this leads me to something, again, I don't want to spend a lot of time on it. Look at chapter 1 of Health, Happiness, and Family Constellations. But this is how I talk about the family soul in situations where you sort of can't really talk about psychic stuff too much, because you don't need to. The family soul is a guiding social intelligence that's distributed among hardwired, largely subconscious behaviors of its members. So it's like the ants and the bees, except that on top of that, we have a huge amount of individuality. The mission of the family soul is propagate life with love. Its primary strategy, and here I differ from Bert a little bit and some of the other people, it's a balance between harmony on the one hand and inclusion on the other. It's not inclusion at all costs. Faced with difficult challenges, the family soul will very often favor the good of the group over the good of the individual. This is the sort of blind love that causes us to take on, grandpa's trauma in some sense, or when we're children and we end up parenting our parents and things like this. And this collective social intelligence it's subject to trauma just like individual intelligences are, except that in this case, stuff shows up in subsequent generations as opposed to in later life. But trauma behaves pretty much the same way in both cases. Stuff is put away for a while. Stuff is excluded for a while somehow. And if there's going to be wholeness again, and there's a drive for wholeness, it's got to come back up again. Okay, that's the end of this. Let me stop the screen share. So this was a big load of stuff, and we're going to stop for questions right now. Shoot, Patrick.
Well, yeah, wow, Michael, that's incredible. So my thoughts went to first very early life trauma, this kind of thing, pre-language capacity, and how that then may kind of stay in that right brain area before it can migrate over to left brain and have some kind of verbal language association to it at some point. I mean, that's maybe a question. But then what you just said takes that even deeper, going to the ancestral kind of, pre-life, if you will. If my life then, extends into that ancestral, and there are traumas that convey to me, and then either do or do not go into that explicit realm. And then my third thing was just that trauma is a relativity. Although there may be very generic things, if a bomb goes off, most of us are going to be traumatized. But trauma for me may be completely different for trauma from someone else. The emotional sensitivity that one person has to something is completely different than another, and accessing that.
Absolutely.
Right.
Absolutely. That went by too fast. There was something I wanted to say. Wendy Ann McCarty has a book called Welcoming Consciousness. I met her at an ASEP meeting. There's a lot of evidence that children are really psychically aware in the womb.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
I mean, not only are they aware, they're aware of what their parents are doing. I mean, every time mom gets upset, that kid is sharing the hormonal system of her mother. Do you understand me? So if mom and dad are happy and in love with one another, that's one kind of experience. And if mom and dad are fighting a lot, that fetus knows this. I'm not saying intellectually or verbally, okay? Wendy Ann McCarty's work is very, very interesting. Welcoming Consciousness, I'll put it on the page, because she's done all this research, and there are other people doing therapies literally that are based on the fact that these kids are, they're psychically aware. They know the family system. In fact, they have not yet budded off the tree of the family system, so to speak. Do you understand me? They're in what I would call a pre-emergent state. So it's not a question of how do they possibly know this. It's like a question, it's more a matter of that's all they know. Do you understand me? They haven't got the outside world organized yet. And to the extent that they do get it organized, it's based on mom's social empathy system or that of whoever the main caregivers are. Mm-hmm. I don't want to spend too much time on this because, again, I want to keep us focused on, the remote constellation stuff. But this is just kind of basic stuff. You have less contact with the person when you're doing remote constellations. So I think it's a value to have this. I think everybody who does constellation should know about this stuff, frankly. The early European people, several of them who taught me said, I never work with trauma. Well, all right, if you only do constellations about what job to get, maybe that's true. But I think it's very hard to never work with trauma. When I was a coach, I was trained that, we cannot, as a coach, I cannot work with trauma. But I can work with what are called gremlins. And those are blocks. And I think that was just a linguistic game, kind of, frankly. It was part of how the ICF needs to help coaches be distinct from therapists, and that's all fine. But Wendy Ann McCarty's book is astonishing. I could tell you there's some of the most amazing stories in there about how they're literally doing therapy with kids that can't talk yet. That a therapist and a parent are in a room and the kid is crawling around and they're playing little games that are kind of oddly like a constellation. And the child is, in terms of what the child is acting out, the child is explaining what's going on. It's beautiful. Okay. All right. So, we good to move? I think we are. Thank you for the questions. Okay. All right. So first problem, here we have with remote constellation is how do we keep client involvement high? A lot of people who started doing remote constellations end up, for example, just doing the constellation on their side and talking to the client about it. I'm not saying that doesn't work. If I set up a constellation, I'm on the phone with you and I tell you, well, I see that this is happening and then now we're going to, and so on and so forth. I'm not saying I don't know. I don't know what works or what doesn't. But I want to help you. My own approach is I want the client as involved as possible. In fact, if at all possible, I want the client walking around in a room feeling into different object persons. I call them object persons because I'm a shaman, for those of you who are not hip to that language. I want them walking around in that constellation, even if it's on voice. So our first problem is, how do we, before I go there, if you look at what's going on with Hellinger and with a lot of seasoned facilitators who've done this a long time, is that they tend to move away from the actual setup of people or objects. I have had constellation with I've been 3 days with Hunter Beaumont, and I had a constellation with Thomas Bryson, Dan Booth Cohen, and Emily Vogel I know really well. All of them have moved away from setups. Why? It's because they've done thousands of these things. Anything that you do that much, you're going to get to where you've seen so much of it that you can do it very quickly. What kind of impact that has on the client, I don't know about that. I would rather see the client moving around, if at all possible, moving physically around in a constellation. Does that make sense? It's just more powerful, I think. I'm not saying that other things don't work, but insofar as you are, in some sense, learning, I really urge you to ground the client as much as possible. So our first problem is, well, okay, if we've got Skype or something like that and a laptop and a client who's like okay with it, I can have the client pick up I can have the client do this. Oh, there's my constellation over there, and there's this, and so on and so forth. Okay? If I'm on voice, I can't do that. In either case, I'm going to use, and I need to screen share again now. Okay, sorry, I'm still confused. Yeah, okay, so it's this, and then we go to the next thing here. And why do I not have my little arrows? Where are my little arrows? There are my little arrows. Okay, so this is my Clockface diagram. This is something, Dan Booth Cohen gave this to me, not the diagram, but, talked about this originally. Almost everybody, I don't care how old or how young, can orient themselves and objects in a room in terms of a clock face. They can, and so what I'll be saying to them is stuff like, well, let's imagine a clock. You're in a room, it's a rectangle. Let's make the long axis maybe be from 12 to 6. And where are you sitting? What's your rest position? Oh, I'm sitting in a chair at 8 o'clock. Okay, fine. I'll note that down. So where's Dad? Well, Dad is over near 1 o'clock. Well, which way is he facing? He's looking at 11 o'clock. What kind of an object is he? Because that gets us into the second problem, is that these people don't have figurines to use. Do you understand me? And I'm going to prove to you, I think, in a few minutes that it's better that they don't have figurines to use, because if they use ordinary household objects or object persons, if they're all alive, it's way much better. Oh, so Dad is an alarm clock, an old wind-up alarm clock, and he's kind of around 1 o'clock, and he's looking at 10 o'clock. And I can note that. I'm going to show you examples of this. All I need to do is put an arrow, the name of the object, 3 things. What's the other one? An arrow, the name of the object, and who it is. Dad, arrow pointing, sitting over by 1 o'clock. So an arrow sitting up here. Well, there's examples here. Let me just show you. Wait. No. I don't know. This little arrow here is somebody looking over here. I just need to know what kind of an object that is. And I've got that here. Wait a minute. And unfortunately, I can't see it because the Zoom stuff is in the way. So this is all just part of working this out here. Oh, the arrow, roughly 8 o'clock in the C ring, looking at 4. I don't know who it is because I can't read it. Sorry. So this little diagram, and you'll notice here, let me go back to this. I send this to the client if we're going to do voice only. But this is worded very, very carefully, because if this kind of, this kind of stuff might be hard for some people to, if they're not that, if they're very touchy-feely, and not, this kind of orientation in space is not something they talk about easily. I don't need to use it. Do you understand me? But I send it to them. And many people do use it, and some people really like it. Sort of guys often really like it, What it does is, so this is the one that gets sent to the client, and this is the one that I use and that I'm making my little marks on. Am I making sense? Wiggle or something if I'm making sense. So I'm going to show you examples of this in just a second. The A, B, and the C rings, mostly people don't use them. I also put the hour hand, the minute hand, and the second hand. These are just ways of saying how far from the center it is. Dad's at 3 o'clock. He's halfway between the middle and the outside. Or someone's over in the corner at 11 o'clock. Down here, I've got a space that says, who is this? When is it? Which constellation or which whatever, because I do a lot with the same people at times. DPC stands for desired positive change, so I have the goal of the constellation, and I usually have some note about the outcome. I may have more notes. A lot of these stuff, some of this stuff gets filled in after. Now, some of you may be saying, oh, how can Michael possibly stay connected to the field if he's writing and he's doing things? We'll be talking about that the whole class, all right? I'll say more about that in a second. Okay, so now let's go to the question of how are we doing on time here? I'm not sure we're keeping up, but that's all right. Okay, so here's a constellation laid out in figurine form. So this is a 19-year-old college student who has difficulty speaking in class and taking tests, and in fact, when she starts talking, she just tends to ramble. Either she can't talk or she just rambles all over the place. And this is what she's here to work on. Her desired positive change is we narrowed it down to be able to speak my truth. So here we have the client. Here we have mom. This is a child miscarried 3 years before a client's birth. All right, laid down because it's an untimely death. This is Italy and also grandparents that had to emigrate. This is an older male teacher, piano teacher, who molested the client at age 6 to 7, and she never told her parents about this. The client's truth is this little guy in the center here, and dad's on top of it. Okay? So this is the kind of thing that most people are doing tabletop constellations with. It's fine. It can work. Okay? Now, but I want you to look at the difference here between this and this, which is exactly the same constellation as it was set up by a client of mine. I mean, I don't think I have to say anything about the difference here. There is so overwhelmingly much more information in this second picture. Look at the difference between this little thing laying next to mom and this scarf, which is blood red and is practically engulfing mother. Do you understand me? The symbolism here is so vastly much richer. Mom and dad and the abuser are all somehow some kind of gold medal. Mom and dad are both hollow rings. Dad somehow has something to do with time. And this is stuff that's picked intuitively or randomly. Do you understand me? I tell people either just, go for what grabs you or else you pick absolutely randomly. If our minds knew what was going on here, we would not be doing this. So get your mind out of it. We'll use our minds later. And we will. But you see the difference, right? Once you've started to do that, plus which these are objects pulled out of the client's home. They're full of meaning for the person. Do you understand me? So this is a way of, now this was a tabletop, and I kind of later moved more towards trying to get people to set them up on the floor someplace so they could walk around in them. What I'm doing is I'm setting up the same thing in my space and walking around in it. I don't have the same objects. Does that make sense? I have different objects, but I have pretty much the same configuration. Okay. Let me show you some quick examples of this. So this is one of my little sets of notes. It's not necessarily supposed to make sense to anybody but me, but person told me there was a recliner in this corner and a recliner in this corner. This is the rest position. This is where the client was. I'll sometimes sketch the room. I found that. Now, you don't have to do this. Do you understand me? This is all just there for you to pick and choose among. The block, the goal was progress in a big project. The block was a basket of stones. The client herself was a statue. I don't remember what kind of statue it was. And over here, looking this way, progress on the project was a stone petroglyph that was here underneath a kind of table. So this is what I drew sight unseen. Okay? This is a picture of that room. So you see that I had a round basket of stones and she has a square one. I don't think it really matters that much. Here's the statue. And the stone petroglyph is here against the wall. It's way back in there. Now, notice that the client, I can't remember what this statue is. It's looking this way, I know. So the client's not looking at the goal. The progress is back here underneath this altar, hiding against the wall practically. And the block is taking up the center of the room. Do you see how rich this is? But my point here is that my picture, my little thing here that I used, it was good enough to let me set up something. Then finally, here's a more elaborate one. This was a phone constellation, voice only. Person wants more clients coming around. And there's an outcome down there. This is, again, a kind of picture of the room. The other thing that happens when you use a whole room is that the various kinds of levels, you've got a vertical dimension too. So when somebody sets up, again, the Skype is blocking some of this. Part of the constellation started out, two of the pieces of the constellation started out up here on tables, and the rest was on the floor. Well, the fact that some things are like, up on I had one client who put her goal up on a mantle that she could barely reach, and in the act of putting it up, this was video, and in the act of putting it up there, it fell down 3 times. That was her goal. So we know that there's some resistance or something here. And we know when something is up real high like that, it's either not grounded, it's spiritual bypass maybe, it thinks it's better. Do you understand me? There's meaning there. How you use this, it's up to you, or even if you use it, it's up to you. But what I'm trying to suggest here is that you can have a client set up a constellation using ordinary household objects. And how are we doing with time? We're doing good. And even with voice, with a few little notes, you can collect enough information to set up something similar enough that you can walk around in it. Or if you want to use a tabletop, you can, do the catalytic finger thing or whatever. You can feel into it. I think if you're not a constellator who's done 1,000 constellations, it's good to do this. I still work this way most of the time. And I'm somebody who did a couple hundred interactive shamanic journeys with people during my shamanic period. I still like to ground it. And I really want the client walking around it if at all possible. That doesn't mean I do mental imagery sometimes. It really depends on the client. If the client is very comfortable with mental imagery, not oriented in space the way I am. I was a cabinet maker for a while, so I'm real good at imagining space. I may do something that's totally mental. But most of what I do is grounded like this. So we're going to stop for questions, and then I'm going to talk to you about unpacking symbols. So thoughts, comments, questions. What have I left unclear, or what bothers you, or what intrigues you, and let me pop over the screen share. Or do you want me to stay in the screen share so you can talk about something? I'll stay in until somebody says something. Talk to me, folks. Pat, go ahead. Patrick, go ahead.
Oh God, what was I going to say? Oh, I lost it. I lost it. What was I thinking?
We can come back.
Yeah, darn it. What was I thinking? Oh, I lost it, man. Sorry.
We can come back.
Yeah.
Who else wants to talk here?
Michael, I have a question. It's Stacy.
Go ahead, Stacy.
I do sand play in my office, and the box kind of contains some of the feeling and emotion.
Yeah.
And when you're putting it on the ground with no container, it feels big. I don't know, like not contained.
Mm-hmm.
Have you had any differences between people who do it on the tabletop and it's like kind of contained versus walking around, or put a mat down on the floor?
Not really. I mean, I can understand that sand play is great. Sand play is essentially pretty much like constellations, except it isn't necessarily about ancestral stuff, right? And the idea that something is a container, that's fine, but a room in a house can be a container too.
Right. It just feels like, I don't know, more space for the emotions, I guess, to flood in.
I'm not surprised that you feel that way, and you may want to continue to work the way you do.
Right.
Do you understand me?
Yes.
And I'm absolutely not here to tell you otherwise.
Right.
Okay.
I understand. Thank you.
Yeah. Again, I was a cabinet maker. I like rooms, you know what I mean? Plus, which I like the different levels. I've had to do a constellation in a bedroom one time, and half of it was up on the bed and half of it was on the floor. And it meant something. And a big movement was when Mom came down to the floor.
Right.
To somehow being like cut off, separate, above it all. I had one lady started out as a big, huge piece of a slice of cypress wood, right? One of these elaborately, where they just cut off the bottom of a cypress tree and the roots, then it's a flat thing. She started out as that thing on the wall. And she was a very, devoted yoga student, and she was easy to oversimplify, very much a spiritual bypass about her whole family. And her family's down on the floor, she's up on the wall. It was a big deal when she decided to come down and sit on the floor with them. And we literally pulled this thing off. This was done in person, but with the same tools, and down in my basement. We went over there and took this thing off the wall and set it on the floor. That was a big movement. So I'm not here to tell any of you how to work, and I understand that there is a symbol there, what's contained and how. But I think a room can be a container too. That's all, and it depends on what. All of this is about what is comfortable for you and what is comfortable for the client.
Right.
Where does your comfort and your strengths lie? What kind of technology are you constrained to use? And where are the strengths and the comfort zones of the client? Those are always your three things that you're juggling, I think. And you can be a sort of person who only does one kind of remote constellation. I think that's fine. I want to serve a wider range of clients in a richer way. And most of what I do now is remote constellations, so I'm pretty successful at it. Anybody else? I love questions. Make me feel good.
Well, this is Craig.
Yeah, go ahead, Craig.
I think you may have answered the question, but let me just check it in anyway. So my sense is that there's a training element that has to happen with the client. That I'm curious if you do that in the intake interview part or in the constellation part or somewhere else. And yeah, I think the answer that part of the answer you gave was that, it depends on the client and kind of feeling in what tool is going to work best with them. So, with corporate people, they really like the tabletop, sort of moving things around on a tabletop.
Absolutely.
So I'm just curious about something to say about training the client in using these tools at all.
I do have little teaching moments or training moments that happened. Mostly, that's why it's a 2-hour constellation.
So you do it in the constellation, not the intake?
Most of it, because I don't want the client thinking about it too much in advance.
Right.
But I'll say, what we're going to do is you're going to just randomly or intuitively pick something from the room or anywhere in your house. And if it's a piece of furniture and it can't move, that's fine. If it's just a corner of the room, that's fine. If it's a movable object and you want to put someplace, put it where it feels right and come back and sit down. And we're going to take turns visiting these representatives. And what we're going to do, we're going to play a child's game. We're going to be them. We're going to play Barbies. We're going to pretend that we are this. I'm going to go and stand next to mom, and I'm going to pretend that I'm mom. And I'm going to feel what my body feels. I'm going to see if any feelings come up. And the other main thing I'm going to do is I'm going to look around at the other representatives in the constellation and see if I have any kind of social reaction. See if, I don't like to look at such and such, or it bothers me to look at this. I also tell them, if it's a floor constellation, I also tell them, you can choose how close you want to get to the object person, to the representative. Because there's sometimes a perpetrator or something, and I might invite someone to feel into that perpetrator, and I want them to have a choice. I want them to, so I say, well, you can either just point your toes at it, if that's as close as you want to get, and then you pretend to be it, or you can put it between your ankles, which puts it in the center of your biofield, which is a more intimate thing, or you can actually pick it up and hold it next to your heart. You always have these choices. Don't go any closer than feels comfortable to you. And remember, we're just playing a game here. It's a child's game. Just pretend to be it and see what happens, and don't worry if nothing happens. That's fine. Mm-hmm. Now that's an example of the kind of stuff that I'm talking to them about. And I'm saying things, I say constantly, if our minds knew the answer to this, we wouldn't be doing it. So in the beginning, please don't draw me a picture. I have people who come out and set up the solution. Well, mom definitely loves dad, so I'm going to put them next to one another, and I want to be close to my goal. And I just look at them and say, we don't need to be here. I mean, this is the solution. And then the course of action is, well, why don't you let's randomize the whole thing. Just change it all. See where it ends up. Then often we start to get a meaningful arrangement. For the field to form and for the field to work, you got to keep your mind out of it. However, it's okay to use your mind to understand what the arrangement is, if that makes sense. And here's the analogy for that I talk to facilitators about. What you're doing in a constellation is you're walking through a garden and picking up flowers. And the flowers are symbolisms. You're just picking them up. You're just putting them in the basket. You're just collecting them. You're not trying to make a bouquet yet. In fact, you're refraining from making too many bouquets until you collect a lot of flowers. Because if you make the bouquet with just 3 flowers and you're going to collect 20, you won't have a very good bouquet. And so what as facilitators, what we do is we collect symbols. I'm going to start you practicing that here in just a second. We collect symbols. We put them in a basket. Then maybe we think about that a little bit and some little pattern emerges. And then we go back and collect some more symbols. And then we think about that a bit in a pattern. And pretty soon, there's a gestalt there. The field is formed. But it was formed by us moving back and forth between sort of thought and intuition, between, stuff that's kind of mental and stuff that's truly psychic. They both can support one another. There's no reason to abandon one for the other. I go back again to the Apache Scouts, to the Native American Scouts who were amazingly deft at reading, trails, tracks, broken pieces of grass, and yet at the same time, they lifted, they pulled the landing gear of the airplane up, and they felt what it was like to be that animal, and even on a rocky, ground with nothing, they could sit there and look at it and say, where's that animal? Well, I'm that animal. Where's he going to go now? I think I'm going to go this way as that animal. You understand me? So what I'm trying to suggest here is that you can use both of these kinds of tools. So there are these client training moments. They're short, they're interspersed, and I typically don't do them until the constellation starts. The first half an hour of one of the 2-hour, thank you for this question, it's an awesome question, brings out the right stuff. First half an hour is really rapport. What's your goal? What's our desired positive change here? Because sometimes it's changed. And then, here's what we're going to do. We're going to play this game, and here's how we do it. And then maybe we'll set a couple of representatives up, and then I'll explain, this is how we visit them. So why don't you go visit that one, and I'll visit this one. And are you on the, if we're on the phone, are you going to take the phone with you? Can you talk to me while you're doing it or not? And you understand me? We good?
Good.
Okay. Anybody else? Feel free. We're doing okay here, and the questions really help. Go ahead, Becca.
So what's your experience with people's ability to I think use the word pretend that they're a representative and to really get the data from the field versus kind of slip into a role play or kind of back into the headspace of, well, here's what I think this representative would be saying or doing?
It's varied because people are different.
Yeah.
But it's not that hard to tell. I don't think it's that hard to tell when somebody's tuned in and when they're not. Mm-hmm. Especially if you can see them. It's harder if you have voice only. Mm-hmm. But their body language, even with voice only, the way they talk, the tones of voice, what you already know about how that person works. Again, I go back to why do we have a whole hour's intake? Mm-hmm. Because I know the person a bit. So yes, I am making judgments about what's like overly mental and what's not. Mm-hmm. And sometimes I visit the same representatives that the client does. I may get a very different sense of what's going on. Mm-hmm. Sometimes that's because the client is being mental and I'm not. Sometimes it's we're both in the field and we're both tuned into different aspects of a complex reality. Mm-hmm. But people are indeed different. But I think that, again, this is a reason for doing the remote constellations slower, right? And have, I have that hour in the beginning, I have that intake, then I have time to digest this. I look back at my notes and the genogram that I've built. And honestly, I get, you could call them insights. I call them guidance. You understand me? And sometimes it's completely, I don't even know why. I just know, yeah, we're going there. I look at it and bang. My subconscious or the field or whatever you want to call it serves up the information. Mm-hmm. So by the time I get into this 2-hour constellation interaction with the person, which again starts slowly over the first half hour or so, I have a pretty good sense. It's not infallible or anything. But the fact of the matter is you are going to deal with people who are better or worse at this. Some people are astonishingly good at it.
Yeah.
I mean, it's just amazing how good they are at it.
Yeah.
And those kind of people, you have to maybe watch out that they don't get too deep.
Yeah.
That they don't, feel into somebody, that they don't feel into someone else's trauma or something like that. You may have to resort to your kind of backing them off a little bit, calming them down a little bit. Do you understand me?
Yeah.
Great question. All these are great questions. All right, so by our start time of about 10 minutes late, we're still doing okay. We got about 13 minutes. I want to start showing you now. I'm not going to be able to see who's... So you people on voice are just going to have to sort of speak up. But I want to talk to you. A lot of people think they don't know how to interpret symbols. They think, oh, if I have a dream, I got to go read a dream interpretation book. All right, I'm one of the founders of the study of metaphor in cognitive science. Metaphor is the tissue of our thought. Okay, we are embodied beings. All our abstractions are metaphors on concrete stuff. So the idea that you can't interpret these kinds of symbols, you may not think you can, but you can, and it's easy. And it's really a case of doing just what I said. You're bouncing. Well, let's just start. I mean, this is called popcorn. You just kind of speak out. When you look at this constellation and you know what you now know about this college student, her difficulty, these circumstances of her life, the miscarriage, the abuse, and you look at this picture, let's just start with that. What jumps out at you? And just either, if I can only see three, so I think the best thing is just talk, and if you talk over one another, you can sort it out.
The wire is twisted.
Okay, who is?
The wire.
Yes. Yes.
The male piano teacher. It looks twisted.
Very twisted.
Yeah.
Yes.
I think a source of strength are the grandparents. Looks very strong.
Yes.
Mm.
What about their position, though?
Let's see now. Wasn't paying attention to that. Behind the mother, right?
But it's really kind of more a circle around. Now this is. Well, I won't go there.
Okay.
What's in the very middle, folks? That's always
The truth.
Right.
All right. What is the symbolism of that configuration in the middle there with the stone and the watch?
It's buried. It's it's between a rock and a hard place.
Yeah.
So,
The client's truth cannot get out from under dad.
Mm.
Right?
Okay.
What's dad like?
left-brained, very sort of, time and detail and things like that would be my
Right.
guess.
Now, none of this is gospel. We're just collecting flowers. Do you understand me?
Mhm.
We're collecting symbols, and some of them are going to turn out to be involved in the sort of larger pattern, and some of them are going to fall away as we put things together. Does that make sense?
Okay.
So this is what other people mean by the phenomenological stance. You don't commit. You stay in this state of not knowing. Somebody else, talk to me. What else pops out at you here?
Well, of course, that blood red scarf.
Yeah. What about that?
Well, that's a death. It's the miscarried child. It's blood. It's death. It's gnarly.
Talk to me about its size relative to other things.
Well, it's yeah.
Oh, go ahead. Sorry.
No, it's quite large. Yeah. It overwhelms the mother in a sense.
Yeah, she feels engulfed in it to me. You can't see all of her, and it's so big in proportion to some of the other items there. I mean, not the client, not the horse, but it's so big in proportion to her parents, actually.
Yeah.
It just engulfs everything.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Very
sorry,
dramatic.
Patrick.
It's very dramatic color, very sort of flamboyant's not the right word, but it's out there.
How are mom and dad similar?
There's circles, as you mentioned before.
They're hollow.
They're hollow.
Mom.
They're both kind of costume jewelry type pieces.
Mm-hmm. Materialistic.
Maybe. We see at this point what we're doing, we just collect this stuff. Do you understand me? We don't commit to it. We put it in our basket.
Yeah.
The client looks vulnerable to me.
Absolutely.
Sad.
Say more about that, please.
She just looks vulnerable, like she's not clothed. You know, she's skinny, or she looks sad.
She's very big. It's like, I would wonder if she was sort of playing a parent role or something like that. She's so large compared to all the others, except for the abuser.
Thank you.
And she's curled up.
Yes. Look at that posture.
Yeah.
Exposed, naked, in fetal position, elongated. So what you do is you look at this and these things pop out at you. And then you can always do the following. Where is it here? All you got to do is ask questions. You can just sit down and do this. I've had people take whole constellations apart this way. Talk to me about the sizes, the shapes, the colors, the orientations, the postures, the origins, the histories, the personal meaning to the client. You just walk through those. Talk to me about sizes here.
Grandparents and the client and the teacher, the molester, are all the largest.
They're absolutely in a different level of size from the others, right?
Yeah.
It's interesting that everybody has gold, except for the miscarried.
So the horse and the statue of the client, you see gold too there?
Yeah.
Mhm.
Okay, that may be our screens or something. I don't really see that much gold there, but it's possible. Again, this the colors in this, the way the colors are working, I can't. They're
like all similar, like browns and beiges. Like she could have picked different colors for all of these.
Yeah.
People.
Yeah.
They're kind of maybe a loyalty thing.
Yeah. Again, there's a method here too, which is just, you first look at, you can sit there and you look at every object and say, how big is it? What color is it? What does that color tend to mean? What's its shape? What is it? What's its orientation? What kind of posture does it display? And you'll notice that the bracelet has a posture too, and Dad has a posture. It's the metaphorical posture. It's not like a human posture, but a package of cigarettes has a front and a back. It has a face. A sphere has no face. A circular ashtray has no face. We don't know what way it's facing. The miscarriage here has a kind of flow to it. Size, shape, color, orientation, posture, origin, history, personal meaning. Now, as you start to put this together, what might you say, what might you tentatively suggest or think is going on here? What is it that this constellation might form itself around? Do you have an hypothesis, a lead as to what we want to do here? What needs to happen here?
Maybe she needs to tell her parents about the molestation.
Absolutely true. Now, let's come back and stay inside the constellation. What kind of movements in this she can't tell her parents in the constellation. So you're right. Maybe she does, and maybe the constellation might somehow enable her to tell her parents. But we need to, like Mark Willin has this concept, the dynamic. The dynamic is the block. And Stacy, in some sense, you sort of mentioned, you've stated the block, right? Is that fair? The block is because she never told her parents. She's really just not able. It was such a huge truth that was that deeply unexpressed. That we've got a big trauma here, right? We've got these implicit memories sitting in her left brain, and any situation of having to talk to people is bringing up this confusion.
Right.
Okay.
So what I see, one thing is that she's in opposition with her parents. The miscarriage is in its proper order. It's in the right place, and she's not. So I'd be curious about seeing what would show up if she moved over next to the miscarriage in her second child place.
Okay, makes good sense. These are possible movements. I'm just kind of waiting for other people to chime in here. What would it take for Dad to get off of her truth?
Yeah, that's what I was wondering.
Maybe she needs more support, like being closer to the grandparents.
That's a biggie. This is about sex, and that horse is a symbol of physical beauty, sexual power, right? Flow, freedom, right? It looks like somehow, even though, see, this position is, none of these positions are, this is not a supportive arrangement. This whole family is caught around the center. All right, nobody's really supporting anybody here. I mean, Dad's looking at Mom for whatever that's worth. But, a supportive arrangement would somehow have to have Mom and Dad somehow behind the client and the client somehow looking at her goal. And the question now starts to be, well, how do we get there? How do we, what kind of movements need to happen here? Maybe we go and feel into Dad and see whether Dad is, willing to accept that, this is a problem, and maybe Dad gets off of her truth. Where does Dad go? Maybe he goes over next to Mom. Where does he want to go? Where do we feel he wants to go? Do you understand me? I mean, this is how we do this. I and the client, we feel into Dad. Dad feels, either we feel nothing, or Dad feels, he feels some kind of remorse, maybe because as Hellinger sometimes talks about, it may be that this older piano teacher somehow enacted the feelings of the father, and that the mom was not available to the father, perhaps because of the miscarriage, et cetera, and so on, this kind of stuff. So maybe Dad's willing to move. So then maybe Dad moves. You see what I mean? And that would then be Dad's, the watch moving over, maybe next to Mom or something. That at least frees up the client's truth. You see what I'm doing now, right? I'm again, I'm doing it with the client. We're taking turns. We're feeling into this stuff. I'm careful about, I don't typically tell the client my reactions until the client has told me theirs. Does that make sense? Because the client has a tendency to think I'm right. So I hold my stuff back and I poll the client first. Sometimes we feel into 2 or 3 things, couple of minutes, 2 or 3 minutes at each one. Sometimes the client talks to me while they're doing it. If they have a headset and they can walk around with the phone, or they're on speakerphone or something. But essentially, we're visiting these either tabletop or floor. We're visiting the representatives. So each one of us is, there's two forms of representative perception here, me and the client. That's it. It's not like a group where there's all these different people doing the representative perception. Make sense?
Yeah. Do you ever have more than one family member with you?
I've had that happen rarely, but it has happened, yeah. And that can be a little tricky. At one time, I had 2 brothers that both wanted to do a constellation in a workshop. And the second constellation, I did it blind because I didn't want the first brother's constellation to impact it. So it was blind until we were mostly through it. Blind means the representatives don't know who they are, right? I and the client knew who they were, but they didn't know who they were. So this is really, this is basic stuff. My goal really tonight, and we're just about done here. I can stop the screen share, I think, right? Yeah, okay. So my goal here really tonight was to answer Maria's question in a better way, which is who can you work with, and how do you how do you deal with this issue of safety in this remote constellation? Was to tell you something about trauma, to give you a quick glimpse of this entirely neurological and systems-oriented way of conceiving of the family soul. I mean, you do not need to go to psychic stuff to understand the family soul. The psychic stuff is probably part of it. It's certainly part of it. But you can explain, a lot of very hard-nosed people, I talk about a distributed collective intelligence, and I use these examples and those little pictures and things, and people get it. It's the truth. That's our problem. Our basic problem as human beings is that we do not understand that we have this collective part that is subconscious, that is always working, and we don't know how to sync our individuality with that collectivity. We're just doing a terrible job of it, and we're creating a ton of trauma in the process. I'm kind of preaching a little bit here. And then I wanted to, the suggested activities for this particular time are going to be around, well, maybe you can get somebody to describe a room to you and see, how you might, do a voice only thing and see whether somebody can describe a situation to you. They'll be up there. But the point is, I urge you, at the start at least, to try to involve the client more rather than less. It's easy enough to sit and do a kind of psychic reading. And some people are very good at this, and I'm not taking anything away from that. I can do just a person just does a constellation on their end. The client doesn't see it. There's no mental imagery for the client, and the person is just talking, well, your father is here and so on. And then if we do this, I really don't recommend that. Most of what I do is set up on both ends, because I'm trying to involve the client deeply enough that their representative perception adds to mine. And I'm using far more richly symbolic representatives than figurines. I mean, sand tray work has a ton of different kinds of little figures and things, not just human figures. And you'll see that Coaching Spaces online gives you the same richness as well. Okay, so I'm done. Any final questions here? Somebody must have something to say. I'm never good without people talking back to me. Everybody's going to be quiet.
Would you use a similar kind of process for the mental imagery that you walked us through in the first meeting in terms of processing it with the client, or something completely different?
With mental imagery, it's like I'm typically putting the client in the center of the clock. Mm-hmm. And then we're bringing in representatives, okay? And I'm learning where they are, or I'm psychically connected, or both, right? I know where the client's putting them, and I know where I'm putting them, and sometimes it's not the same. Mm-hmm. And I'm really kind of watching both carefully. Okay. And learning from both of them. I don't pull, in the mental imagery, I don't pull the client out of himself or herself into the other people the same way. Okay. I ask them what is, since the imagery can move and act and do stuff, mm-hmm. And since I have all the NLP things of how big is it, what color is it, how intense is it, what happens if you try to move someone a little closer or a little further. Do you understand me? Mm-hmm. I can get information about the different representatives that are spread in the clock face around the client in a different way than having the mental image of the client go over and become dad. Yeah. I might do that, but I don't do it very often. Okay. I let the image of dad speak more for itself. Okay. Because it can do that in this world. Yeah. Okay. And that's probably the primary difference.
Okay.
But I'm still, if at all possible, I'm trying to involve the client in this. And I'm often following the client's representation. The client says, Dad's over at 9 o'clock and he's looking away from me and we're very small. Then I unless something tells me different, which it does sometimes, I'll put Dad there in the same way. I'll hold the same imagery. Now, we get several family members and the goal or whatever it is up there and in there, so to speak now, right? Mm-hmm. And the question is, well, can Dad move closer, or what happens if Dad turns around and looks at Mom? Mm-hmm. And it happens. I mean, the image of Dad won't do it. Or the image of Dad just literally skitters away or disappears or something. Do you understand me? Where me and the client both are reading the symbols, looking for ways to midwife some sort of rearrangement of the system. Mm-hmm. Okay? Not force it, but nudge it at times. You understand me? Sometimes it just moves on its own. I mean, sometimes it just does what it needs to do and you don't have to do anything. Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Other times I think what I do is Dad, that your son over there is really suffering, or your grandson is really suffering. Are you sure that's what you want? How do you feel about that? That's me nudging Dad. Mm-hmm. And then frankly, I go away and leave Dad alone. I don't stand there and push on him. I never do that. Never. I think I've seen constellators who home in on one representative and spend 20 minutes working on that person to shift something. And the rest of the constellation is like neglected, and the circle in the group is like, no, we don't know we're bored. Yeah. The container is dissolving. And that's not the way you do it. You go and you nudge that person and you go away and leave them alone. And then you come back a few minutes later and say, well, what about that? What do you think about that? Mm-hmm. You understand me? Mm-hmm. You plant the seeds and you walk away from them. This again goes back to what I call the butterfly method. I'm dealing with a whole system and I deal with it by moving around a lot. Till very late in the constellation when maybe it's time to just, okay, one of these two people has to move. And then I've had great success with saying, well, I guess we're not going to be able to go any further here. I'll give it a couple minutes, but then we're just going to have to leave it. And at that point, that's the reverse English. That's the some ancestor who's being represented is like, whoa, my chance is going to go away here. Right? Maybe I won't get another chance like this. And I tell you, I think I can only think of one time that gambit didn't work. I just sit there and say, well, we'll just have to quit soon. Now, it's a little hard to use that particular trick in a remote constellation, though I've done something like it. But you will get, you and the client both will get in contact with the souls. If you do this well and carefully with humility and integrity, you will get in contact with the soul level energies of these people. It won't be complete, it won't be perfect, but it'll be, and if you really focus the goal, the desired positive change, I think it just works much better than if you have a fuzzy goal. Somehow the clarity and focus of the goal pulls in the field. And you work with them. You're basically trying to help birth a baby here. And the baby is a better alignment of the system, right? Where life and love flow now around this particular thing. All right. Thank you all very much. This is great fun. It's a whole new world. I'm still not totally used to the prezzies, and there are still things and so on, but I think we're doing all right. So suggested activities will be up tomorrow, and Stacy will have Sandy will have the video up and so on and so forth. And any readings that I mentioned will also be, either they'll be in the first, they've already been mentioned in the first one. And again, don't be overwhelmed by the amount of information or suggested stuff. Take what works for you in the time that you have. Take some of it later, however it works out for you. Thank you all for being here. I'll see you in a week.
Thank you.
Have a wonderful week. Namaste.
Thank you.
Thank you.